Hello everybody, this is Katje. I welcome you to a new video presentation. A good title for tonight's video might be Sexy and Smart, or in German, Geil und Schlau. I want to try to bring both of those things together tonight in a way that I hope you'll find enjoyable and also informative. So let me begin with the sexy or the Geil part and show you this very cute mini tube skirt that I bought yesterday at a store called Love Culture. This is a national chain, so you should be able to find one at a mall or a shopping center near you, especially if you live in a fairly large urban center. So I really like this tube mini skirt. It fits me quite well. It's cute, it's enjoyable. I'm also wearing these Calvin Klein high heels, which are very comfortable. And they give a kind of business accent or a kind of a professional accent to this outfit, but it still is cute and fun and very comfortable to wear during the summertime. So I just wanted to show you that, and I really like it. The pattern with the gray check in it is one of my favorites, and so I enjoy that. And when I'm excited about clothes, my mind often turns to philosophy. So what I wanted to do tonight is say a little bit about some of the things that I've been thinking about in that regard, since I was trained in philosophy many years ago and still work in that. And what I want to talk about tonight is the way that philosophers, and actually many of us, often think about reason, at least ideally. How do we think about reason, which is a value that we all prize, that we all take very seriously? It's an ideal. And the way of thinking about reason that I'm going to describe goes back hundreds of years to Plato and early Greek philosophy, where Plato was writing the Socratic dialogues. So the picture of reason that I have in mind is that reason is something that is two things: compulsory in a way, and also ubiquitous or pervasive. And the German word for reason is Vernunft. I might use that from time to time, or Vernunftigkeit. So what does it mean to say that reason is compulsory? It means that, in a sense, it means that, well, let's take, for example, in logic. Those of you who have studied logic will know what I'm talking about, but the basic idea is pretty straightforward. And that is when you have a logically valid argument that's also sound. That's a logically valid argument with true premises. So that means that the conclusion follows deductively from those premises. And since the premises are true and validity transmits truth, it means that the conclusion is also going to be true. So that if you accept the premises and you understand the rules of reasoning, then you have to accept the conclusion. You can't not do that. It would be very difficult to resist accepting the conclusion once you accept the premises. So a classic example is a syllogism like, all human beings are mortal, Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. Those are true premises, and the conclusion follows from them, and so the conclusion is also true, and you have to accept it once you see the truth of the premises and follow the reasoning. It's a path that you have to go down in a way. Another example is, a slightly broader example is science, and the scientific method or the experimental method understood in a very broad sense. So here again, the basic idea is pretty straightforward. You come up with a theory, and the theory predicts certain observations or certain experiences, and then you test that. You design an experiment to test whether those predictions are fulfilled. If they are, great, you can continue to accept the theory and maybe develop it further. But if the predictions are falsified, if the theory makes predictions or predicts experiences that don't happen, and that happens over and over again, then the theory has been disconfirmed and you have to give it up, or at least some part of it. So you have to. There's a compulsion there. So that's one aspect of reasoning that I wanted, that's part of this way of thinking about reason that's very deep in our culture. The other is the pervasiveness of Vernunft or Vernunftigkeit, the ubiquity. It's everywhere, according to this ideal, or this, I'm going to say, myth, because The universe is supposed to be reasonable. It's governed by laws of reasoning and rationality and logic and all the rest of it. And people too are reasonable, or if at least if they apply themselves, then they will see that they have to follow these logical arguments, or that science is going to teach them things that they can't help but accept. So that's the ideal. Now, I think when we look at the reality, that's really not the case. The reality of the situation is quite different from the way reason is being presented ideally. So we can see in what happens in nature or in everyday life, sometimes things aren't very reasonable. Things happen that don't make sense. They're purely random acts or events that happen that aren't very rational. And when we turn to people, the situation is even worse. You would expect that if reason were compulsory and so ubiquitous or pervasive, then more people would be reasonable, and also the people who were reasonable would tend to be much more successful than the people who aren't. When we look at the situation today, especially in the United States, we see that that's not true. Because a lot of people, first of all, aren't very reasonable at all. They don't really think very clearly. And then there are those who are aware of that, and they instead of having respect for logic and evidence and truth, they will tell lies, and then when the evidence is presented that shows this to be a lie, they'll double down. How many times have we heard that in the news in recent years? So they will tell falsehoods or just make up things without any kind of respect for evidence or truth or proof or standards of reasoning or logic or anything like that. Now, instead of failing though, these people are basically running the country. They're running the show. So it seems to me that if somebody really takes this mythology, now it's beginning to look really like a mythology, but if somebody really takes this picture of reasoning seriously as something that's both compulsory and pervasive, then that person should be very disappointed and indeed disturbed by the fact that the world around us doesn't seem to be very reasonable, nor do people, and in fact people who don't have any real use for reason are quite successful. Now, what I want to end with tonight is just a passage from a very famous book by Friedrich Nietzsche that many of you probably have heard and maybe even read. Also sprach Zarathustra, thus spoke Zarathustra. And I've been working through this text today in German, or recently in recent days in German, and I came across a passage the other day where Nietzsche calls this picture of reasoning that I've been describing, this mythology, into question. So what I'm going to do is just read this in German, and then I'm not going to translate it literally, I'll just paraphrase what he's saying. So here's what Nietzsche says, and in the person of Zarathustra, who's the main character in the book. So he says, diesen Übermut und diese Narrheit stellte ich an die Stelle jenes Willens, als ich lehrte, bei allem ist eins unmöglich, Vernünftigkeit. Ein wenig Vernunft zwar, ein Same der Weisheit zerstreut von Stern zu Stern, diese Sauerteig ist allen Dingen eingemischt. Um der Narrheit willen ist Weisheit allen Dingen eingemischt. Ein wenig Weisheit ist schon möglich, aber diese selige Sicherheit fand ich an allen Dingen, dass sie lieber noch auf den Füßen des Zufalls tanzen. So Nietzsche is saying, well, this idea that reason, Vernünftigkeit, is in everything, that's impossible. That's not really the case. Vernünftigkeit is not in all things. Yes, there's a little bit of reason scattered here and there among the stars. It's not like the world is completely irrational and doesn't make any sense at all. But the idea that, and that's possible, but for the most part, things dance according to chance or randomness. They don't follow reason. That's that wonderful end of it where he says, dass sie lieber noch auf den Füßen des Zufalls tanzen, that they would rather dance off the feet of chance or randomness. And so Nietzsche, you see, in the person here of Zarathustra, is calling into question this picture of reason that I've been describing. And I think that that's very interesting. I think it's particularly interesting for those of us who are cross-dressers, or transvestites, or transsexuals, or transgendered people, people who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, people who have been on the margins of society for a long time, and still are to a large extent. I think a lot of us can kind of relate to what Nietzsche is saying there and calling into question, because we were taught, and maybe we picked it up from the culture around us when we were growing up, that, well, for the most part, things make sense. Things are reasonable. If you follow these rules, then you'll be successful. If you follow reason and logic and the scientific method and all the other things that I talked about a minute ago, if you follow that, then you'll be treated fairly. You'll be treated successfully. If people will just pay attention to that, they will treat you fairly and with respect. And I think a lot of us realize that that's not the case. That most of the time that's not the case, or all too often that's not the case. And that the people who don't do those things, the people who are unreasonable or intolerant, often are the ones who succeed. So I think that that's not a reason for us to give up. It's a reason for us maybe to question some of our ideals about reason and not to treat reason as if it were a god or something sacrosanct or perfect. I don't think that we want to say that we should give it up or that we should never be reasonable or anything like that. I don't think Nietzsche was saying that. But I think we need to be careful not to deify it, not to over-idealize it. And what I hope to do in a later video at some point is start to address that again from the perspective of trans and cross-dressing people a little bit. And maybe there's some things that we can do or ways that we can respond that would help us to find things besides reason that might help us to make the world a better place. So I'll leave that for another time. Thank you for your patience. I know that I went on a little bit, but like I said, when I get excited, then sometimes my mind turns to philosophy, and I just wanted to share that with you. So once again, here's this really cute skirt that I bought, and I'm really happy to have found it. I hope that everybody has a wonderful night, a peaceful and restful night. And so this is Katje, and I wish everybody farewell and happiness until I see you next time. Bye-bye.